Welcome to the I Create Daily podcast. I'm Leora Alderson.
And I'm Devani Alderson. We are your co-hosts on this journey of creativity and productivity.
I Create Daily is for artists in every genre of creating, from musicians to writers, crafters to inventors, bloggers to entrepreneurs. I Create Daily is a movement for creators serious about your art.
If you're into creating anything, this podcast is definitely for you. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. Welcome to the I Create Daily podcast. I Create Daily is a movement for creators serious about creating their art, and I'm Devani.
And I'm Leora, and our guest today is Michelle Khouri. She's a dynamic and enthusiastic artist involved in music and theatrical performance. Michelle has been singing since her arrival into this world and is host of the Artistically Creative Cultured podcast, where she interviews people in all areas of the arts. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. Thanks for that awesome introduction.
Well, it was fun reading your About page because you just beam off the page as you describe in there. It's very clear your energy, your enthusiasm, and your positivity just radiates through the camera and radiates in your written word as well. So it's something the world needs more of.
I can't turn it off. Yeah. It's intense for some people because I'm like ever enthusiastic. And then also it's very confusing for people when I have like a very like low key day. They're like, is everything okay with you? I'm like, yeah, I'm a human. I have ebbs and flows, but mostly this is me.
Yeah, that's right. This is awesome. This is the normal.
How did this become you? What's the origin story?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I was born the way that I am, as most of us are, but there's a lot of conditioning in society that tells us to be this way or another. But because I was born as sort of this rebellious spirit, I was told by a lot of people that I was too much, or that I should be this, or that I should be that. And I just can't. I don't know how to be any other way but myself, which is, it was kind of a blessing and a curse when I was younger because I could not conform. And as you know, when you're younger, conforming is better, it just makes things easier. But then as I grew older, I realized that I'm able to, as a fellow podcaster that introduced us, Taya Roxon, tells us, make a difference through my differences. And I love that he says that.
Yeah.
So I was just born this way. To now quote Lady Gaga, what is happening here?
All the quotes.
Yeah. So I'm just quoting everyone.
So how did you get to right now, your podcasting? Are you doing any other kind of creative? Are you like working in theater right now? What else are you doing?
No, I haven't worked in theater for like 13 years now. And it's so funny that you should say that because, I used to actually be in musical theater and also a dramatic actor on stage. I specialized on stage acting and also a singer, obviously, as part of musical theater, but also that was a drive of mine. And then I left theater and went into public relations, which to me, I've always been a writer as well. So as a part of my own drive, I've always been reading and writing and like writing poetry, but also in theater, you have to learn about psychology. And so you have to read a lot of psychological works, like let's say by Sigmund Freud or Carl Jung, because you have to learn what motivates people because you have to become those people and embrace their motivations. And so that led me into a career as a writer. So I eventually went from PR and communications into a career as a magazine editor for a few years, where I was telling all sorts of stories, both people's stories, building stories, city stories, which I really love. I love history. But I've always in that time, I was doing some work as like a theater critic or theater reviewer, and just following arts and culture, because that is just like my soul urge, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I decided I needed a forum where I could directly connect to an audience, because I'm such a personal person. I want to connect with people, and I didn't want my words cut. So word counts get like smaller and smaller and smaller. And for a storyteller, that's painful. So the podcast was a natural, I gave all of those ideas, all those obstacles kind of gave birth naturally to a podcast, which to me is like a perfect forum besides maybe video.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Oh, well, that makes perfect sense. And I can totally relate. And that's something that Devani and I have been talking about doing for a few years now. And it was just never the right time. And we finally
Right.
decided to, essentially take the leap and take our own advice. And that is, now is the time. There's probably no better time than now,
Yeah.
just because there never is
Totally.
a perfect time, and so we kind of discovered that all the more that the podcasting is really where our passion and purpose intersect, in particular in the opportunities to meet with amazing people and learn their stories and share their stories in ways that help elevate others, in particular other creatives. So anyone creating anything. So yeah, so this is, I totally.
Like the Cultured Podcast is all about that. And I think more than anything, the Cultured Podcast serves two purposes, at least for me and my vision. With art and with creating something, you have to relinquish control at a certain point, because it takes on a whole new definition in life when it is received by the consumer or the audience.
Yeah.
But when I put it out there, the intention, there's two main ones. And one is to spread beauty and inspiration via arts and culture, to me, which are like basic human desires and necessity. Human expression ends up resulting in arts and culture, and we've seen that since the beginning of mankind, like cave paintings and just like ancient oration traditions. And to me, the idea of, let's say, cutting funding or thinking is so counterintuitive and so counter what humans themselves have expressed since the beginning of our humanity. So that's one. And then the second one is, I think, the more globalized we become, which is kind of a beautiful thing, the more xenophobia happens, because people have such a fear of the other, and this fact that there's other cultures out there that celebrate things in different ways, or that place higher priorities on different things than you do, ends up being this very unsettling concept to certain people. And I want to provide a forum through which, in a very safe environment, people can see that there's a pretty common denominator across all humanity, which is just like this desire to express and love and feel safe and secure.
Yeah, definitely. And to connect with others. And so, yeah, that's beautiful. And so you mentioned culture a few times. And so the audience doesn't yet know, was it your father was Argentinian? Or your mom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, well done. My dad was Argentinian and my mom is Colombian. So I'm first generation American. But I grew up part-time. I grew up in Miami, Florida, which is already like a very Latin upbringing.
Yeah.
And growing up part-time, going to Bogota, Colombia for my entire childhood. So, and then also my mom would take us traveling around the Western Hemisphere. I haven't been to the Eastern Hemisphere yet, but I'm hoping next year's the year, because that's like such a different world too,
Yeah.
And so I grew up with this sense of feeling completely drawn and attracted to the other rather than fearful of the other, and seeing such beauty in my smallness in terms of the larger equation of the world.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, one of the things that Devani and I were looking at your site earlier, culturedpodcast.com, and I just kept saying to her, I said, wow, her site's so beautiful. Wow, I love the colors. Wow, look at this interview, global herbalism. So we're really glad to discover you, and look at you now. I've got you on my podcast playlist. So we're definitely going to get into that more. So
that makes me so happy. That makes my heart sing. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome. So go ahead. Do you want to? Devani's got a cold, so if I do more of the talking today, it's partly.
Oh my God! Feel better, you poor thing.
Yeah. Hopefully on the mend soon. But so with all of that you do, is podcasting your full-time thing? Is the Cultured Podcast what you do full-time, or no?
No, but I would love it to be. Only because my God, my whole soul goes into it. It's my baby. And it's one of those things where you start doing it and you're like, oh, this is what I was meant to do. Like this is part of it, But the breadwinner of my life is my consulting side. And so I do marketing and PR for a variety of clients, but the way that I've really been able to merge my passions is now by specializing in podcast marketing. So I help podcasts, podcast marketing is like the wild, wild west of communications, but because I am a risk taker, I was able to do all this experimentation and risk taking on my own podcast and start like building this list of do's and don'ts that's preliminary. And so every podcast, depending on the topic or the niche or the audience or the goals, has different strategies that we could use. But so now I try to help as much as possible podcasts, podcast production companies, and podcast networks.
Oh, that's
awesome.
But I have all sorts. Like I do PR for a choreographer, and I don't really say no if it's a good fit and we jive.
Right. So you're right. So basically anyone who needs help with their marketing and PR is.
Yes, I do. So I built my website, the culturedpodcast.com. I built that. So I do, and I also design the logo. So I do graphic design, web design, content development for your website, and then I do the marketing side. So I build strategic plans from a marketing perspective, and then I actually execute on those plans with my team.
Okay. That's awesome. And just going a little bit off script for a second, it's kind of rare for somebody who can do all of that at once, like the marketing and the amazing design and the execution of that and the PR bit. So that's cool to know.
Thank you.
You've done a great job with your own site. Yeah. And so with that being sort of the day job that you still enjoy doing, and then your podcast being like the sole purpose, how do you, what are your daily habits, routines, and structure for making sure that your podcast is on schedule, that you're also doing your client stuff and everything? So what keeps all that running?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And especially for creatives, which, I mean, I'm a pretty methodical person. I'm a Virgo and I'm like fairly methodical Virgo, you know? And, but even then I don't like routine.
Hang on. You locked up.
Pause. Mm-hmm. All right, back guys. We just had a little technology quirk. So picking back up with you being a fairly methodical person.
Yeah, so I am a fairly methodical person, but even then I don't love a routine. And so I'm very mentally organized, but I also use a to-do list that's a Chrome extension that's really nice to keep me on track. And then I use this awesome thing called Bitrix 24. That's a free project management tool. It's kind of like a free Basecamp, but it's like, oh my God, the features are incredible. I would definitely recommend it, especially if you have team members. So that's why I use it for my team members. So I'm able to assign projects and tasks with deadlines and add all of this detailed checklists even. And that keeps both me and my team members on track, because one of my team members works from Germany. So she's on a totally different time zone. So it's really helpful to find the right tools. And then everything I do is digital so that I can act on it immediately. So I use DocHub for contracts and agreements so that I can send them out digitally. The client can sign them digitally. So eliminating as many steps as possible is the way that I keep things flowing. But let's like not even pretend like I'm the queen of organization and awesome. Because I just do it. And some days I'm like uploading a Cultured podcast episode on Saturday night. They come out Sunday mornings. And I'm like, crap, you know, but now I'm real, right? Yeah. So like now I'm starting to really, especially with the holidays coming up, like mama needs a break. So I am getting ahead of the Cultured podcast, and, you know, I have a new team member on board. So she's really helping me get ahead of it. And in that way, I also have a big workload coming up with my clients. So I would say the biggest thing I do is I'm always looking 2 months ahead. And in doing so, I'm able, like when the holidays come around, to say, okay, I'm going to work 2 episodes a week. In other words, like editing and finalizing and doing show notes and things like that for the next few weeks, so that I can have episodes done through the year, like the new year. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fantastic. The productivity tools you mentioned are also very helpful. So let's just be clear. The one that you said that is a to-do list. What is the name of that? Chrome extension,
Gosh,
I think
I don't remember. Actually, it's on my phone. Let me take a look. It's Todoist. So
Okay.
Todoist, it connects to Chrome, and it also, you download the app and it all syncs together.
Okay.
And you're also able to connect it to Gmail. So if an email pops up that's a to-do, you can like mark it as one.
Mm-hmm.
And so it connects, really nice. And then I use Bitrix24 for project management. I use DocHub for agreements, digital agreements. I use Wave for invoicing and tracking all my client information. So kind of like a CRM, but I don't really have use for a CRM yet. So and Wave is free, Bitrix is free, Todoist is free, and I pay like, let's say $5 to $7 a month for DocHub.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the tools I use for productivity.
Did you try, before doing Bitrix, had you tried Asana or what is in one of the other ones?
There's one other that I can't never
Any of the
remember.
other platforms that?
Treble.
Yeah. Trello. Yeah.
Trello. Yes, we did it. It's like charades, like one word.
Yeah,
I don't like Kanban or whatever they're called. I get very like visually stressed out if something's not very organized and clear, and to me those like little boxes everywhere like really confound me, and I found Bitrix through just like Googling, and it has so many more, it has such a potential for growth. And that's also something I do with my clients with strategic plans, and also in everything I do, I try to set myself up for future growth. And so the idea is I want tools that will allow, that can be the foundation for a little shack for now, but that I can build a skyscraper on one day, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that concept.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. So you are making a full-time living as a creator, basically. Well,
yes.
Not yet with your podcast, but you
Right.
are certainly with your marketing, and that's a very creative outlet and endeavor, especially if you look at it that way. That's what you have to be doing, even if it's not your most favorite thing. As you know, when you can serve clients and bring creativity to their needs, that's very rewarding for you and for them. So one of the things our people in our audience many of them are artists, writers, composers. Creators could be coders and architects, anyone who's creating on a regular basis, many of whom are either doing it part-time while they're working in their full-time job, or they're doing it full-time. They've taken the leap, but they're still in that feeling of struggling stage. So any tips that you can give for things that you've experienced yourself, as well as whether it's in your marketing or in your podcast, that will help creatives? Like, what are the most, sorry, I'm taking a long time to ask this simple question, but it's like, what are the most profitable things that you do for your business?
I think that's a really good question. And I would say the most profitable thing I do for my business is have trust and flow. So we are like rivers, like we ebb and flow. We're not waterfalls, in other words. And so I think as creators, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to create constantly, create perfectly, and create consistently. And that's just not realistic. The most profitable thing I do for my business is allow myself to ebb as much as I flow. So that means that, for instance, this week, I have everything that I'm moving forward, but at the same time, I'm feeling like a little bit slower. And I used to guilt myself for that a lot, and that would just make me more tired. Nothing was productive about that. So give yourself rest and don't be so harsh on yourself. Everything you create is beautiful. That just the mere act, the action of creating is something miraculous. So if you allow yourself to see it as such, you'll realize that no matter what you're doing, whether you're creating something, your magnum opus, or just a little something, whatever you threw together, it's beautiful and it's pretty astonishing.
Yeah, definitely. No, that makes a lot of sense. So this is like something you mentioned earlier about the marketing for podcasts. I don't know if this ties in and if it's something that you would be interested in, but I wondered about, there's a need for podcasters to find sponsors. So is that something that you might expand into your service offering, is like kind of becoming that agent or that person to connect? Because then it would also help you.
I think that's interesting. So that is actually something I'm starting to do with the Cultured podcast because it's growing way more quickly than I expected or dreamed. And so now I'm finally at the place where I am approaching sponsors and allowing conversations to unfold with advertisers. And it's really difficult. I mean, it's something, it takes a very specific skill set, and I will say that's not my specialty. I do have a network of people who are sort of on board with helping Cultured with that, but I'm just going to be honest, there's like big companies set up for this, like mid-roll or similar. There's smaller companies than mid-roll, but mid-roll is like the bigger example that are set up for securing advertisements for podcasts. And because there's like massive podcasts under their umbrella, they're able to do it in a way that's really cost effective for both parties. Yeah. So I would suggest you actually look into those. I believe there's one called, damn it, I think it's like Kick. I don't know. Just Google it. Google knows everything. Yeah. Like we all sold our souls to Google a while ago. So.
Yeah, definitely.
So just take advantage of that. Yeah. So there are some good companies out there, and I don't think a lot of podcasters are aware that there are like much smaller than mid-roll that can help you. And there might be in your local cities some. I also suggest like look into podcast networks, because podcast networks essentially do that, right? So they get a bunch of podcasts under their umbrella and they're able to offer packages and things like that. You know, I'm a part of a podcast network in Atlanta called 0 Mile Media, and it's a new network, and it's sort of shaping up to be this arts and culture network. It's really cool. So we're able to offer some really cool packages to clients who are more interested in like the realm of arts and culture, for instance.
Sure. And the podcast network, is that almost literally like the radio version of podcasting? So it's just sort of like you're the network, and now Cultured Podcast is one of the shows under this network. Is that how that?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, basically that's exactly it. So there's this, and each network offers something different for its member podcasts. Whether it's, the main thing they offer is advertising opportunities and sponsorship well, mostly advertising. But I function a little bit more independently just because that's who I am. Right. Sensing a theme.
Yes, yes.
So I function a little more independently, and because I've been pretty deeply entrenched in Atlanta's arts and culture scene, I have a lot of contacts that I very strategically reach out to, or am going to start reaching out to. And so, you know, the way I do it, to give some practical advice, because I know I've been a little bit high level and abstract thus far, but like practically, I follow my intuition a lot, and so I know when the timing is right and when it's time for me to reach out to such and such person. And so right now I just hit a point where I was like, okay, I had this like one organization in mind. I was like, we're dreams for each other, and I know we are, you know? And so, okay, it's time to reach out to that organization. And so I'm very purposeful also because the Cultured podcast is my baby, you know? And so I covet it and I protect it, and I want my listeners with every ad. And yeah, this is like a little idealistic, so I'm sure it will evolve. But in my little baby idealistic phase, I want every ad to be able to serve and add value to my listeners, because I protect them as much as I protect the podcast.
Yeah. And I think that's a big culture shift. Speaking of culture, just in general, it's like we don't want to be so bombarded. I mean, that's why we tune into podcasts. We tune into podcasts because we want a specific solid chunk of content, and it's why we're moving away from radio, because it's like all these ads that we don't care about. Like I literally am not the demographic for this random ad that you're just placing out onto the sound waves. And so with the podcasting, you get to be very selective with like, hey, this organization has a story, this business has a story that I want to feature, and it will bring value even though it's not the exact content.
Exactly. Yeah. No, radio, I can't bouncing around from station to station, and all of them are like on commercial for like 55 minutes. I'm like, no, I can't.
Yeah. You end up with about 15, 20 minutes, if you're lucky, of actual content.
Yeah.
So, right.
Yeah, so definitely. One of the things that, again, sort of like learning from your personal experience, I get the sense that part of being the rebel, there's a little bit about being in control as well. I mean, I can relate to being a rebel and, running your own businesses, and being a little bit about being in control, and also being an artist and a creative and a trained graphic designer, creating such amazing work. But now that in order to grow, you have to leverage your time by hiring others. You already have a team. How are you managing, the artistic, perfectionistic mindset about how things should look, and the control factor with, it's good enough when it comes from your team kind of thing?
Yeah, that is an exceptional question, because I know a lot of us really struggle with letting go. And I have to thank 8 years of corporate experience for that. So like I look back and I'm like, how did I stay in corporate for so long?
Yeah.
And I always felt stifled, but it gave me invaluable experience. And so I did rise ranks and manage teams or managed employees, and informally so as well. I've always like kind of stepped up and either naturally become a leader of a group, or was like kind of chosen or dubbed the leader of the group. And that can be really difficult and kind of a pain in the butt, but you got to do it, and you have to learn to let go, and nobody's going to live up to what you think it should exactly be, but everyone adds something. And so, especially as a writer, so a lot of the products that we produce through my team is writing. And I mean, I hire people on board who can mimic or align closely with the way that I write, because my clients hire me for my writing, right? And so that's also kind of a barrier, is like a lot of clients, when you are the face of the company, or when they're hiring you as a personal brand that's evolving into a small agency, they expect your quality of work. And so that's really difficult. But number one, like, hire people who you trust from the get-go. And even though my team members are part-time, I gave them writing tests and I interviewed them twice, and I took it very, very seriously. And I haven't had to train one. Like basically they just hit the ground running. So your first act in letting go of control is actually in controlling the process of interviewing really well. And then you can let go control, and patience is really important. And so be patient and understand that nobody's going to be exactly you, and that's okay. So there is a lot of relinquishing there that years of experience taught me to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. And so with that, are there any areas in your business that you struggle with, whether it's your agency side or or podcasting side, or both?
Yeah, so amazingly, the podcast, it all flows so naturally, which tells me 100% I'm meant to be doing this, but the hardest part about being a small business owner is the ebbs and flows of, in other words, cash flow. So some months you're going to be flush and some months you're not. And so the hardest lesson I've learned so far is trust and flowing. And that goes back to those ideas of control, is that you can't control those things, and you can do your best and you can participate and give it your all. And just because it's slow one month doesn't mean you're going to be like out on the street the next. So getting your mind out of this idea of like constriction or restriction, and then like absolute flow to the point of exaggeration. So keeping a baseline within yourself is really important. And that's been one of my hardest learned lessons.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So speaking of lessons, do you have mentors or people in particular in the creative realm that have inspired you in what you're doing?
Well, that's an interesting question. I feel like I have so many, like all of my friends, all of my closest girlfriends are people who inspire me on the daily. And so, I feel very fortunate, but also I don't have tolerance for toxic relationships. So I keep a very, very small, tight circle, but one that, I have a friend who's building a tiny house hotel, and that
really
it just blows. I know it blows. It's called Emma. I'll give her a little plug. Hema Tiny House Hotel.
What was actually, the name again? What was the word?
Hema.
Okay.
Hemma, and it's in Athens, Georgia, and it's stunning because she's Scandinavian. She's of Swedish descent, so it's Scandinavian style. It's really amazing. And then I have another friend who was a dancer when she was younger, left it, was out of it for 10 years and was doing PR, and went back into dancing when she's like older than everybody else, and she's booking movies with Kevin Hart, and she's doing like really incredible things.
Wow.
But all of these things take courage, and these are the same friends who, when I wanted to quit my job but I was too scared, believed in me more than I believed in myself. And you need those people around you. Definitely. So more than mentors, I have just like constant muses that surround me.
That's incredible. That's wonderful, fortunate, and also purposeful, like you said, and it's very important, as we all know the quote by Jim Rohn of you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time around, and that in order for us to grow and become more of who we can become, we definitely need to have those in our environment and in our relationships who are seeking to do the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. So do you have, so we are learning, we're all learners and we're all creators. Do you have any regular kind of are you taking any courses? Are you studying? And if you are, what are they? And how do you balance between creating and consuming?
Yeah, that's actually a really hard balance because at the end of the day of creating, especially writing, which is so mentally intensive, I can't read anything. I'm like, I can't, but I am. When I try to learn, when I want to learn, it's actually less about school topic, less about, right now I'm reading a book about quantum physics because I'm so fascinated by the idea of vibrations and energy. And so I'm reading a book about quantum physics called The Elegant Universe, and it is stunning and really mind expanding, but really hard.
Yeah.
Because it's
very dense.
Physics.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
It's hard.
Yeah.
So it's hard to make mental space to read that book. But one of my favorite activities, and I haven't done it as much recently, but it's awesome, is I go to the High Museum of Art here in Atlanta, and I look at a painting. I'll just walk around, I'll look at paintings, which is refreshing in itself, but I'll also pick a painting that calls to me, and I'll sit down in front of it and write a short story inspired by that painting, just something really short that will flow. And that gets me really thinking, that gets my imagination pulsing, and me creating a new world. So I really like to do that.
So are you an aspiring fiction writer or already a fiction writer?
Yes, I am. I am working on my first novel, and working is way too active a verb.
I completely relate to that.
Yeah.
Are you working on a book too?
Working.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's a very active term for what I'm not doing with that book.
Yeah.
Lord have mercy. I spent so much time. I spent 40 hours building the whole background of the book. And then I actually wrote the first chapter. And then I got so stuck on what the plot is. I have no idea what the plot is. I know the beginning and I know the end, but I have no idea how she gets there. So I'm okay. So that was a year ago that I put it down.
That is literally my story.
Yeah.
That's literally exactly what, I was I know the beginning, I know how it starts, I know the people, I know the ending, I know the destination, I know the series mapped out. I don't know how they get from book 1 to last book.
So it sounds like we need to interview an author. But the other thing, now you do know part of the answer. And that is that you don't do it daily.
Right.
So right now, the opportunity to write fiction daily is not really on your map, or you haven't carved it out. That's the priority for that. Yeah. So if that were the case, then the story grows. The story's is waiting for you to dive into the story. To show up.
Exactly. And I mean, I will say that I never let the idea of my novel go. And so I'm gathering research almost daily. Everything I look at and everything not everything, but it pops into my head constantly. And so I do think that everything's meant to come as in its time, but you do need to participate. So my plan is to, right now I'm actually ghostwriting a memoir for a client. And so that's actually great practice because that'll be the first book I've ever written, you know, so that's an interesting.
And to get paid to do it, that's a fantastic way for a writer to get published. Go ahead and be a ghostwriter, get paid to do it, hone your craft. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's intimidating, but I would say the first few chapters were the most intimidating. That first manuscript delivery deadline was so terrifying, but then she cried when she read it, and she was like, oh my God, you're telling my story in a way that I could have never done. And I was like, okay, all right. So you start building confidence, but my plan is to be able to stabilize my business to a point where I'm earning disposable income, you know, because right now it's like, it goes to me, it goes to my team, it goes to me, it goes to my team. And so to stabilize it and to grow it some. And then my goal is to spend 1 week per month at a cabin, and it's just writing. And so just like, maybe not 1 week, but maybe I start with like 3 to 4 days, but like isolated. Like
we have the cabin. Instagram. We have the cabin for you. We're right up the street, you know, from you in North Carolina, and we have a cabin in the foothills.
Stop.
Yeah.
Do you know that like I fell in love with a cabin in North Carolina, and that's how I got this idea to do this?
Okay. No, I didn't know that. So there you go. How about that? You never know the connections. Yeah, absolutely. It's in Pilot Mountain, North Carolina. So afterwards we will, send you that information.
We should do a writer's retreat.
We would love to do a writer's. Right now, it's a 3-bedroom, 2.5, and so it's on 50 acres. And our vision is to build a larger home and be able to have writers' retreats and such. So definitely, that's a bigger part of our vision.
Oh my gosh, we're like synchronizing right now. That's amazing.
Exactly. So but back to your thing about your story.
Writing.
Yeah, no, there was something relative to, so the interview we did right before you was with Adil Amarsi, and he is an amazing, and so it'll come out slightly before yours, and we'll definitely send you the link so you can listen to that, because he is a brilliant copywriter, retired copywriter actually, who is able to has like continuity of consciousness in telling stories, and he just flows the right kind of advertising and marketing of the story. What was it that got me onto that? Something she said.
When we were interviewing him, he almost wrote like 2 sales pages, and it was just
So when you get back and then for your own business,
unbelievable, because that takes a copywriting is such a practice in psychology. It's unbelievable. It's really cool. Wow. I'd love to listen.
Struggle with that, but I don't remember something you said made me think that wanting you to connect with that. It was ghostwriting, but it was something else. Anyway, I'll come back to it or put it in the show notes if I remember the exact link. But I know that he would be somebody who you would really enjoy learning from relative to when it's time to bring your own story out. And the thing about when you're sitting in front of the painting and you're writing a story inspired by that painting, if that artist is still living, let them know. I mean, send that story to them, because you never know. That's an amazing gift for them.
That's a great idea.
You never know what that could lead to as well. It could just be a gift, a contribution, without, you're letting the apple tree, letting that seed go, or the acorn, what do they call it? The oak tree, letting that seed go and float in the wind and see where it may fall, and you may never know, but it might actually take root and develop into something more. Just like cabin.
I love that idea. And also, like, I love minds like yours, because I'm one of those people who will create. And if I'm creating for a client, then it's, I send it to the client, but I never think in that way that you just did, where it's like, share it with the people that it touches organically. I never think about that. I keep it all. I'm probably one of those writers that's going to like die, and they're going to be like digging up stuff and be like, oh, she has 52 books. Let's publish them.
No.
Let's not
say that. Yeah. Don't say
that. Just kidding. Now I know you. It'll be okay.
Now we have a cabin. Yeah. You'll write your books. And
Now you'll have it. You'll picture it instead. We're going to change. They're going to reframe that. We have walls lined with a bookshelf lined wall of all your books.
Yes, all of our books.
Yeah, there you go. Well, so let's see, what do we have?
Let's see.
So what you mentioned, the book that you're now reading. What was the name of that book again?
The Elegant Universe by Brian
Universe.
Greene.
By Daniel Greene. Okay.
Brian
Greene. Okay, good. We'll definitely include that in the show notes. And in closing, do you have any advice for aspiring artists, creatives, of something that has helped and touched you the most that we haven't already covered?
This is going to sound so cliche, but you are so much more powerful and capable than you realize. And maybe you do realize, and in that case, awesome. You are light years ahead of the rest of us. But if you are wanting to make a living of your art or your creativity, you can do it, especially now that there are ride sharing apps and there are ways to make money that are more in our reach than ever before thanks to technology. You can do it. So stop doubting yourself because you're wasting precious energy on negative thoughts. Reroute that into a creation mode. Reroute that. Now, I will say you have to take a leap of faith, and it is terrifying. But once you do it, you're going to feel more powerful than ever before. Absolutely. So do it, and you're special, and everything you create, there's a mysticism to it, because if you really think deeply, that's why I read quantum physics, because I don't understand how magical we can all be. Yeah. And so you're magical.
Yeah, definitely. That's fantastic advice. A great note to end on. Thank you so much for spending this time with us, for sharing your experience, your journey, your enthusiasm, and I can't wait for what's next for us, because I'm sure we're going to see you in North Carolina.
Yes, definitely.
I'm so ready, you guys. I'm so ready. Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
You're welcome. Okay, talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us for the I Create Daily podcast. Please let us know what creatives you would like us to interview and what topics you would be interested in hearing more about.
And if you enjoyed this show, please leave a review on iTunes. We value your feedback. We read all the reviews, and it just helps us get the word out on the I Create Daily podcast. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.